Have you ever believed that just one small act, one right choice, in a single moment, could change an entire life? A poor man finds a wallet, inside, a fortune. He could keep it, but he doesn't. A wealthy woman, living in a world where everything has a price, suddenly meets someone money can't control. They come from two different worlds. One lives to survive, one lives to own. But fate gives them a chance to change how they see honesty, love, and the true worth of a human being. This story isn't just about love. It's about choice, about dignity, and about the one thing money can't buy: trust in someone who has nothing to lose and would never sell themselves short. Keep reading, because maybe you'll see yourself somewhere in this story. On a chilly December evening, the Grand Elm Shopping Center was glowing with lights and filled with familiar Christmas tunes. Holiday spirit pulsed through every corner, from wreath-lined stalls to long lines of shoppers loaded with bags. But in the basement, behind the public restrooms, there were no lights, no music. Just James Bennett, 25, quietly scrubbing each tile, with hands roughened by chemicals. At exactly 8 p.m., James leaned against his mop and let out a deep breath. It was the last shift of his third straight week, without a single day off. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but one thing kept him going. Grandpa Walter had to be cared for, even if it meant night shifts every single day. Just then, a glint from the floor caught his eye. Near the sink lay a Rolex, vintage, round face, worn dark brown leather strap, unmistakably real. He picked it up, heart skipping when he saw the faint engraving on the back. "To my Charlotte, forever proud, Dad." James froze for a moment. This wasn't something someone casually lost. It carried meaning, deep, personal, maybe everything to whoever owned it. He looked around. The restroom was empty. No one came back for it. His mind raced. Sell it? Keep it for now? But his heart knew better. He thought of Grandpa Walter, who always said, "A decent man doesn't keep what isn't his, even if the whole world says he should." Under the soft yellow light of the hallway leading to the parking lot, James quietly wrapped the watch in the handkerchief from his pocket and made his way to the information desk. Behind him, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" began playing from the loudspeaker, like a gentle send-off for a decision even he didn't know would lead him somewhere new. Some gifts, the owner never realizes they've dropped, but the one who finds them knows it was never theirs to keep. The next morning, in the penthouse apartment of Hudson View Tower, Charlotte Reynolds, 36, a high-profile real estate investor and one of New York's most powerful women in finance, was tearing through her bag in rare panic. "No way," she whispered, flipping open every compartment. "Where did I leave it?" She stopped, standing still as if she could summon the watch by sheer will. That vintage Rolex had been a gift from her father, who passed away just last fall. Every time she looked at it, she felt he was still close, reminding her of values money could never buy: dignity, honesty, and trust. Just then, her phone rang. Rachel, her personal assistant, popped up on the screen. "Charlotte," Rachel said, breathless with emotion. "Good news. Someone turned in the watch last night at Grand Elm's info desk. No name left. Just said they found it near the basement restroom." Charlotte gripped the phone tighter. A strange mix of relief and shame crept in. Someone in a city of millions had the chance to take something priceless and chose to return it. No ask, no name, no reward. "Did they leave any kind of clue?" she asked. "Only this. The man's name is James Bennett. He's a janitor. Left his number, said to call if you needed to confirm." Charlotte paused for a few beats. The last person she remembered doing something kind for her, not for gain, not for status, was her father. And now, a stranger had done the same. That couldn't be a coincidence. "Rachel," she said, voice firm but edged with emotion, "reach out to him. Set up a meeting. I want to see James Bennett as soon as possible." Across town, in the break room behind the movie theater where James had just started his morning shift, his phone buzzed. A short message. "This is Charlotte Reynolds. Thank you for returning the watch. I'd like to meet you today if you're free. I'll come to your workplace at 5 p.m. James stared at the text, heart pounding. A strange mix of nervousness and caution rose inside him. Why would someone like her want to meet someone like him, a nameless janitor? He glanced at the big screen playing Christmas trailers, then slipped the phone back in his pocket. Maybe this meeting wouldn't just be about a watch. Because sometimes, The best things begin with the smallest unnoticed act, but the right people always notice. At exactly 5 p.m., the neon lights outside Grand Elm Cinema flickered on, casting a warm orange glow over the glass panels by the entrance. Beneath the awning, Charlotte Reynolds stepped out of a sleek black sedan with poised grace, her camel coat draped over her shoulders, golden hair pulled back neatly. She didn't need a business card. Her presence spoke for itself. She approached the ticket counter, polite but brief. "Excuse me, is James Bennett working right now? I'm Charlotte Reynolds. He's expecting me." The ticket girl nodded instantly and called on the radio. "James, someone's here for you. Name's Charlotte." Inside the hallway behind the stage, James Bennett, 28 now, in a plain uniform, mop in hand, froze. His heart pounded irrationally. He'd imagined a dozen versions of this meeting, but now that it was happening, he felt unprepared. Minutes later, Charlotte and James stood face to face in a small break room, surrounded by the scent of lingering popcorn and muffled movie scores from the other side of the wall. "Thank you for your time," Charlotte began, voice low and to the point, just like her demeanor. "I believe you know why I'm here." James nodded slightly, maintaining polite distance without fear. "I guess it's about the watch." Charlotte placed a small box on the table between them, opened it, revealing the vintage Rolex resting on black velvet. "This watch," she said, fingers gently brushing the glass, "was a gift from my father. He passed away less than a year ago, and I lost it on a night I wasn't in the best state." James looked at the watch, then at her face. No judgment, no awe, just calm understanding. "So, you came to say thank you?" Charlotte gave a faint smile, rare, imperfect, but strangely sincere. "Not just that," she said. "I came to ask something that, in my world, rarely has an honest answer. Why did you give it back?" James was quiet for a few seconds, then looked her straight in the eye, voice steady. "Because it wasn't mine, and because, if it were me, I'd hope someone would do the same." Charlotte said nothing, but didn't hide the emotion in her gaze. Inside her, a wall began to crack, not from a grand gesture, but from an answer too simple and too kind for a world that's grown too complicated. "Do you have any other jobs besides this one?" she asked, abruptly changing the subject. James nodded slightly. "I deliver pizzas in the evenings, and I do temp shifts at a mall on weekends." Charlotte studied him. She recognized the type. No complaints, no demands, just quietly doing what's right. "So if I offered you a different job, more stable, better pay, no floor mopping required, would you hear me out?" The air paused for a beat. James looked at her, part skeptical, part surprised. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Charlotte replied. "I'm rebuilding the community outreach department at a real estate investment fund, and I need someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Exactly. Someone who knows the value of honesty. Who does the right thing when no one's watching. Someone like my father." James fell silent, stunned by a woman who, up until that moment, had represented a world he thought would never understand his. He didn't say anything, but inside him, something shifted, like an underground stream stirred awake. Charlotte stood. "I don't need an answer right now. But here's my card," she said, handing him a cream-colored business card, her name embossed in fine print. "If you ever feel ready for a different world, I'll be waiting." Then she walked away, tall and steady, leaving James standing there, card in hand, heart still trembling with something he couldn't name. The next morning, winter sunlight filtered through the small attic window, casting a soft glow over scattered notes and unpaid bills. James sat at a worn kitchen table, elbow resting on the surface, slowly turning Charlotte Reynolds' card between his fingers like a reflex. He'd read her name more than 10 times, and each time it still felt both foreign and faded. Since that short conversation at the cinema the night before, James had been stuck between doubt and hope. A different job? A whole new world? When had someone like him, a man juggling 3 shifts a day, eating cold sandwiches on break, never knowing what paid leave felt like, ever been offered something like that? At the corner of the table sat his mother, Anne, thin and fragile from prolonged chemotherapy, quietly knitting on a wooden chair. Tired, but never too tired to rise early and make coffee for her son. "You're awfully quiet. What's on your mind?" she asked, voice raspy but warm. James looked up, resting his hand on the card. "I was offered a job. At a big organization. Good pay. Real work." Anne's hands froze. Then she smiled gently, her eyes not surprised, but full of belief. Then maybe the good your father talked about has finally come. James frowned slightly. What did Dad used to say? She set down the yarn and looked him straight in the eye. He said, you're a good man living in a world that's losing its goodness. And if you keep living that way, life will eventually answer back. James said nothing, but his heart fell still for a moment. He looked at his mother, then around their small room, every wall etched with quiet sacrifices. The years he gave up college dreams to care for her. The nights he came home late, hands calloused from lifting, mind worn out but never giving up. Not because he expected anything in return, but because he believed in the value of decency, even when no one's watching. And now, Charlotte Reynolds had seen it. By late morning, after hours of thought and a long phone call to the clinic to ask about his mother's treatment options, James stood up. He changed into a freshly pressed shirt, buttoned it carefully. No tie, but something in his stance had changed. Firmer, clearer. He picked up the phone, called. On the other end, a calm voice answered. Reynolds Foundation, how can I help you? Please, may I speak to Charlotte? James Bennett. She'll know who I am. Seconds later, Charlotte picked up. Her voice still low, steady, unmistakably clear. I had a feeling you'd call. I think I need to understand more about the job you mentioned, James said, unable to hide the careful tone in his voice. If that offer is still on the table, it is. And it's waiting for you, Charlotte replied, without hesitation. Her voice made James feel something strange, not dazzled by promises or titles, but grounded. This wasn't someone trying to impress him. This was someone who saw value in him, value that so many had passed over. A few days later, James walked into the Reynolds Foundation, not as a delivery guy or a janitor, but as a candidate for a community program coordinator position. He didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in a very long time, something inside him felt steady. Trust. On a Monday morning, the winter sky still hung low with clouds. The pale sunlight wasn't strong enough to cut through the haze wrapped around the city's glass towers. James stepped off the bus, an old backpack slung over his shoulder. The leather shoes he'd carefully polished the night before made soft sounds on the polished floors of the Reynolds Foundation building. For the first time in his life, James didn't feel like an outsider to a gleaming world. He was stepping into it, not as a visitor, but as part of it. The receptionist gave him a warm smile as he approached. Good evening, Mr. Bennett. Miss Charlotte is waiting for you on the 18th floor. James nodded slightly, his hand tightening around his backpack strap like a small act of reassurance. Inside the elevator, the soft background music did little to calm the growing anxiety in his chest. He wasn't afraid of challenges, but he feared not belonging. When the elevator doors opened, James stepped into a hallway lined with refined gray carpeting, natural light pouring through large glass windows. Charlotte stood waiting by an office door. Today, she wore a cream turtleneck sweater, her hair neatly tied in a bun. No elaborate makeup, but still exuding her usual calm composure. Welcome, she said, her voice still gentle, but today, with a touch more warmth. James nodded. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Charlotte opened the door and gestured for him to enter. The office wasn't large, but it was bright and modern. A simple desk, some bookshelves, and framed photos on the wall, showcasing community projects from around the city, senior homes, charity classrooms, resettlement areas. We're not looking for the most skilled, Charlotte began as they sat down. We're looking for someone who truly understands why community programs need to exist. And you, James, you understand that. James paused for a moment before replying. I don't have a degree. I've never studied management. I have never worked in an office. But I know what it's like to live on the margins of society. I know how it feels to be an elderly person with no one to talk to. I know the look in a child's eyes when they eat from a charity meal, but still worry there might not be any left tomorrow. Charlotte didn't interrupt. She looked at him, deeply, sincerely. That's exactly why I want you here, she said. After discussing the role, organizing supply drives for the homeless, coordinating volunteers for the upcoming Thanksgiving, partnering with mobile health clinics, James was led to a small corner office down the hall. A modest workspace with a ready computer and a small sign that read, James Bennett, Community Coordinator. He touched the edge of the desk, a feeling both real and foreign. After years of working just to survive, no one had ever put his name on a sign with that kind of respect. And right then a quiet question flickered in his mind. Did Charlotte truly want to help me, or was there something more? About a week into the new job, James began settling into the pace at the Reynolds Foundation. Each morning he brewed coffee early, opened emails, mapped out schedules for the volunteer team. From the outside, it looked like a regular desk job. But for James, every event outline he drafted, every call he made to the old senior center was a memory, a piece of his own story. But the deeper he stepped into Charlotte Reynolds' world, the more he sensed something that felt both kind and dangerous. On a quiet Thursday afternoon after a strategic meeting with the board, the office had grown unusually silent. James was sorting files when Charlotte walked in, holding 2 cups of hot cappuccino. "Still working?" she asked, setting 1 cup on the desk. The warm aroma filled the small room, making it feel cozier. James shook his head slightly, smiling. "Just finalizing the plan for the Christmas gift night for the homeless." Charlotte took the seat across from him, no longer keeping the usual professional distance. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice slower now, touched with reflection. "There was a time I thought I understood kindness, how to help people. Then, once, I tried to help a former employee by paying off all his debts. I thought I was doing the right thing, but he disappeared right after, leaving only a note. I don't need a savior. I need a chance." James didn't respond immediately. He gazed toward the window. Rain had started to fall, droplets tapping gently against the glass like a quiet knock on the mind. "Are you afraid I'll do the same?" he asked, turning slightly to look at her. "Afraid I'll think you're just pitying me?" Charlotte hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'm afraid I'll make someone feel small again because of my good intentions. I hate that feeling." Her words surprised James. He saw not a distant, polished boss, but a woman who had once been hurt by her own compassion. "You don't make me feel small," James said softly, but firmly. "You make me feel like I can grow, with dignity." The air in the room shifted. This was no longer just a conversation between employee and employer. It was something more honest, more vulnerable. Charlotte stood up first, slipping back into her composed manner. "This Saturday evening, I'm hosting a fundraiser at my home. If you don't mind stepping into my world again, I'd like to introduce you to some influential people." James paused. A private party, among the wealthy. It was the kind of space he'd avoided all his life. He nodded slowly, though his eyes held some hesitation. "All right, but you have to promise," he said, squinting slightly in half-jest, "not to leave me standing alone too long in the middle of them." Charlotte laughed, a light, unguarded laugh, rare and sincere. "I promise. I won't leave you alone." Saturday night, the early winter wind swept through the long streets of Westbridge Hill, where grand houses stood lined with trees wrapped in warm yellow lights. The home of Charlotte Reynolds, a classic American-style estate with a wide porch, was glowing brightly, alive with the Thanksgiving fundraiser. James stood at the foot of the front steps, adjusting a simple gray tie and the suit he had borrowed from his roommate. He didn't belong in places like this, and he knew that too well. Walking through that door wasn't just stepping into a different world. It was stepping into a space where every glance could be a hidden blade behind a polite smile. When Charlotte opened the door, she was radiant in an emerald boatneck dress, her hair elegantly tied low. But what made James pause wasn't her appearance. It was the softness in her eyes and the faint breath she released when she saw him. Without a word, he knew she had worried he wouldn't come. "You came," she said, her voice as light as wind brushing through the white daisies on the porch. "I should probably thank you for the invitation, but I have a feeling I am about to be thrown to the wolves," James said half-jokingly, lightly tugging at his collar. Charlotte smiled, stepped forward, and offered her hand, a gesture both unexpected and bold amid the watching eyes. "Don't worry. I promised I wouldn't leave you alone." James took her hand, and together they stepped into the crowd, a world of glittering metal, red wine, and conversations filled with capital letters: funds, partnerships, strategy. Polite greetings floated around them, paired with friendly but subtly sizing glances. "Who's he? What's he doing here? A community coordinator? From where?" Then, a woman's voice rang out, sharp, like the first chill of winter. "Charlotte, you always surprise people, but tonight you've truly broken the mold." The woman was Martha Sterling, a longtime Reynolds Foundation board member, 20 years older than Charlotte, and once a close friend of her mother's. Charlotte held her smile steady. "Martha, let me introduce you. This is James Bennett, my colleague in the community education program." "Oh?" Martha raised an eyebrow, eyeing James head to toe. "Sounds noble. And where exactly are you from?" James could feel the challenge behind the well-groomed words, but he stayed calm and answered in an even tone. I used to teach in a tough neighborhood on the south side of the city. Now I help Charlotte connect resources to the places that need them most. Martha nodded slightly. From the field to the red carpet, her eyes flicked toward Charlotte with implication. Careful with people trying to climb too fast. She didn't speak loudly, but just enough for a few nearby to catch her words and glance over. James tightened his grip on Charlotte's hand. She said nothing, but he could feel her hand tremble slightly. After Martha moved on, James turned to Charlotte. I'm not bothered. Charlotte pressed her lips together. Well, I am. They're used to judging people by family names, school affiliations, or how many zeros are in their accounts. James smiled softly. I've been evicted before for missing rent. My list looks different, but I'm trying to rewrite it. Charlotte looked at him, her eyes quieter now. And I've never let anyone into my life without knowing how to keep them. In that moment, soft music played from behind. James tilted his head and offered his hand. Then keep me for tonight with a slow waltz. Let's start from the simplest place. Charlotte laughed, gently, sincerely, then placed her hand in his. Sunday morning. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of Charlotte's room, stretching across her desk, still scattered with notes from the community program. The phone rang quietly. She picked it up, still in her robe, her hair loosely falling at the nape of her neck. Will you be coming to tea this afternoon? The voice of Catherine Reynolds, Charlotte's mother, calm but always laced with invisible weight. Charlotte paused for a second. She had known this call would come. After last night's party, the rumors surely reached her mother before sunrise. I'll come, she replied, and hung up before any remarks could follow. That afternoon, in the cream gold living room of the old Reynolds estate, Charlotte sat across from her mother. The tea table was impeccably set, almond biscuits, crisp wafers, and a steaming pot of Earl Grey. Who did you bring to the party last night? Catherine placed her teacup down, gaze steady on her daughter, not sharp, but clearly probing. Charlotte inhaled quietly. His name is James Bennett. He's my partner on the underprivileged scholarship project. You already know that, don't you? Catherine folded her arms, her sharp eyes framed by long lashes. I know enough to see he doesn't belong in this world. No family, no background. Someone like that. Do you think he can go far with you? I don't need him to go far with me down a red carpet, Charlotte replied, voice slow but firm. I just need him to walk beside me where I'm actually needed. Catherine shook her head, her eyes a blend of disappointment and worry. Charlotte, you can't let a fleeting emotion make you throw away everything your father left behind. Your position, your future. Charlotte set her teacup down, her shoulders stiffening. My future, mother. Not at another cocktail party. Not more compliments from people who won't even remember my name the next day. A long silence stretched between them. Then Catherine softened her voice. One last effort. I only want your life to be lighter. Loving someone like James. That's a choice that brings weight. You know that. Charlotte looked into her mother's eyes. Not angry, not defiant. Just a steady conviction finally formed. I've lived with that weight for 20 years, mother. Trying to please everyone, play the role, maintain the image. But for the first time, I feel like myself. That evening, James was tidying his workspace at the community center when the door swung open. Charlotte stepped in, her hair down, a long coat reaching her knees, her eyes deep like they carried autumn with them. Is something wrong? James asked, his voice soft, not invasive. Charlotte didn't answer right away. She stepped closer and handed him a small box. Guatemalan coffee, she said. The kind you said you liked, but never bought because it was too expensive. James looked surprised, taking it. Why are you giving me this? She looked up, no longer avoiding his gaze. Because I realized I've always chosen what's easy to accept, what's predictable, and you're the only thing that scares me, but also makes me feel real. James gave a small smile, placing a hand gently over hers. Scared, but you still came? Charlotte nodded. I may not know everything yet, but I know this. I want to stand beside someone who makes me face myself, even when it's not easy. They stood there, no promises, no far-off dreams, just a shared breath, a quiet understanding strong enough to keep them steady amid everything else. 3 weeks after that pivotal conversation between Charlotte and her mother, the community center where James worked had taken on an unusual buzz. The underprivileged scholarship project he and Charlotte launched was entering its pilot phase. Outside, the season's first snow fell gently on the steps, a peaceful contrast to the quiet storm forming between them. Late on a Friday afternoon, Charlotte stood before a large whiteboard in her temporary office at the center. The board detailed every classroom, funding package, and the names of selected students. Her hair was tied high, neat, but her face, something about it was heavy. James entered, still holding a folder, sleeves rolled up and chalk dust on his arms from the skills training room. He saw Charlotte's distant gaze and felt the growing distance between them. "I met with the foundation reps this morning," Charlotte said flatly. "They want to feature the project on the New Year's broadcast, but they want me to be the spokesperson. Alone." James frowned. "I'm not included?" Charlotte shook her head slightly. They said, "You don't fit the image they're building for the campaign." The words landed between them like a stone. James let out a dry laugh, eyes dimming. "You mean, I don't fit the tailored suits and long-winded introductions? That's not it." Charlotte tried to stay calm. "This is a chance for the project to get exposure. If I say no, everything could fall apart." "And what about us?" James asked, slowly. "Are we falling apart too?" The question stopped Charlotte cold. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both hurt and frustration. "You think I chose the spotlight? Do you have any idea how hard I have to fight every night to stay true to the values we started with?" James stepped closer, his voice lowering. "It's not about you choosing the stage lights. It's about you walking ahead without turning around to see if I could keep up." Charlotte lowered her head, her mind tangled. That night, she returned to her elegant apartment, unlocked her phone, and reread a message from her mother. "I saw the article about your project. It's good. But be careful. The media can lift you up, but it can also bury you, especially when you walk alongside someone who doesn't fit in." She turned off the phone, sighed, and pressed her forehead into her palm. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt lost, caught between her career, her emotions, and herself. Meanwhile, James sat alone in the small garden behind the center, the very place they first spoke. In his hands was a draft of next semester's curriculum. But his eyes didn't read, they stared into the quiet dark. He loved her, not because she was the heir to a corporation, but because she was the only person who looked at the project the way he did, with truth, a hunger for change, and unshaken belief. But now, between the spotlight and the messy reality, he wondered, was the woman standing beside him still the Charlotte he once knew? December 30th, late afternoon. The city's largest shopping mall had been transformed into a dazzling countdown venue for New Year's Eve. Lead rings pulsed to music. A 3-meter Christmas tree stood proudly at the center of the atrium. On the outdoor stage, a bright digital banner read, "Honoring Outstanding Community Projects, 2024 Backstage." Charlotte wore an elegant, yet simple ivory dress. Her hair was styled neatly. She stared at the event script in her hands, but her mind was elsewhere. She hadn't seen James since their argument. No messages, no calls. He hadn't come to the center in 2 weeks. Part of her wanted to call him. Another part was afraid. What if she called? And he really had chosen to walk away. 6:45 p.m., the program began. Charlotte stepped onto the stage to applause and camera flashes. She smiled, a polished, professional smile, and began her speech, just as rehearsed. She spoke about the scholarship project, the children who had gained access to education, and the changes it had made. But her voice softened when she came to the inspiration behind the project. "There was someone," she began, her eyes sweeping over the brilliant crowd below, "someone who never went to college, but taught me that a degree doesn't define someone's ability. He showed me that kindness and perseverance can transform an entire community." The air shifted. She paused, voice catching. "I used to believe I had to become someone great to change the world. But he showed me, sometimes change starts from something small, like listening, like trust. And I realized the person who truly helped me find myself wasn't the one on every headline." The audience fell silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, rising and warm. Charlotte bowed slightly, eyes glistening, not from the lights, but from hope. A quiet, trembling hope for something more. At the very back row, James stood motionless. No suit, just a pale gray turtleneck, jeans and hair slightly damp from the first snow falling gently outside. He had heard every word. James hadn't come to test her, not to make a statement, but simply because he missed her. And when he heard her speak of him, no name, no title, but in a way that pierced right through him, he knew Charlotte was still the Charlotte he'd first met. They had just moved too fast and forgotten to wait for each other at the bends of life. After the event, Charlotte hurried off stage. Amid the congratulations, the bouquets, and interview requests, she searched for one person. She turned, and there he was, under the amber glow of the street lamps, snowflakes resting gently on his shoulders. No words. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You heard it?" Her voice was soft, nearly lost in the background music. James nodded, his gaze softening. "And you haven't changed." She smiled, almost relieved. "I just needed time to remember who I am." He stepped closer. "And I needed to learn not to walk away just because the one I love walks faster." A quiet pause stretched between them. Then Charlotte said gently, like an invitation that didn't need an answer, "The center's first class of the year starts January 20. I haven't found anyone to lead the soft skills course." James smiled, that kind, steady smile she had fallen for the very first time. "I think I still have the lesson plan." January 20. The winter air still held a chill from the early snowfall. Sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the Community Skills Center, casting a soft golden hue across the old wooden floor and neatly arranged desks. Charlotte stood at the whiteboard, coffee in hand, still steaming. This morning marked the first soft skills class since the break, and James had promised to teach it, but for now, he still hadn't arrived. She wasn't worried. Unlike before, when every expectation came with the fear of being left behind, this time, Charlotte felt an oddly calming sense of peace. 8:57 a.m. The sound of the door opening. James stepped in, a simple white shirt, arms full of documents. He nodded at Charlotte, as if there had never been any distance between them. "Still drinking black coffee?" he asked quietly, eyes flicking to the cup in her hand. Charlotte nodded, smiling softly. "And you're still 3 minutes late?" He smiled, not defending himself. "I just wanted to walk in while you were looking toward the door." They stood there for a moment, no apologies, no accusations, just a quiet understanding between two people who had learned to listen more than speak. Class began. James opened with a simple question: "What do you think is the most important soft skill to survive? Not just at work, but in life?" A boy in the front row raised his hand. "Listening?" A girl added. "Confidence?" James nodded. "Good answers. But there's one thing I believe is the foundation of all soft skills: owning up to mistakes and making them right." His eyes scanned the room, then paused briefly on Charlotte. She met his gaze and didn't look away. "Sometimes," James continued, "we're so afraid of failing, of being judged, that we forget what helps us grow isn't success. It's how we get back up after falling." After class, the students left the room laughing and chattering. Charlotte tidied the desks, while James stood by the window, watching the children playing outside in the back courtyard. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking at him. James turned, his gaze warm. "For the class? For coming back?" He walked over, standing beside her. "You know," he said, "I used to think that if I walked away, you'd miss me. But turns out, what you needed wasn't someone to be missed, but someone patient enough to stay." Charlotte didn't reply. She gently tightened the scarf around her neck. "I've learned that lesson," she whispered, "that no one comes into our lives to be perfect. They come to teach us something. Sometimes how to love again, sometimes how to let go." James asked, "And me?" She turned to him, smiling softly. "You're both." In the distance, snow began falling again. Small, light flakes drifted down into the courtyard, layering over the footprints left behind. Charlotte and James stood quietly by the glass. No more words, but inside them a new season had begun, one that didn't need promises or affirmations, only presence, quiet and real. That afternoon, snow fell heavier than forecasted. Charlotte slowly backed her SUV out of the center's parking lot, the old engine letting out its familiar winter cough. In her rearview mirror, she saw James talking to an elderly woman, Mrs. Dolores, who lived alone at the end of the red brick row, where Christmas lights had already been strung since November. Charlotte watched in silence. Mrs. Dolores waved at her, then gently clasped James's hand, as if passing on something deeply personal. Trust, gratitude, a kind of forgiveness only the elderly know how to give without words. Late that night, Charlotte poured more tea into a worn brown ceramic mug, the only remaining cup from a wedding set nearly 10 years old. On the table sat a stack of center files, a list of families needing winter help, blankets, milk, heating oil, gloves for kids. Her head throbbed from numbers. The fundraising budget was still short, sponsorship letters still unanswered, and Snow didn't wait for kindness. A knock on the door. James, he stood there, holding a large cardboard box. The wind rushed in with him, but his eyes were full of warmth. Someone sent over some winter items for the center, he said. I figured you'd want to check them first. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. No name? No. Just a handwritten note. Once received kindness. Now it's my turn. Charlotte opened the box. Inside were 12 brand new hand-knitted scarves, each one wrapped in tissue paper, with a small card that read simply, "Stay warm, you're not alone." She picked one up, the yarn soft, warm, not because of the material, but because of the hands that had looped each stitch with care. James stood quietly beside her. In silence, they understood. Some things don't need thanks, only to be passed on. Later, in the small kitchen, Charlotte folded the scarves, stacking them by color. Her hands paused on a gray-blue one, the color of the sunset the day she and James reunited at the center. I used to think I wasn't good at trusting, she said, her voice soft like the steam rising from the kettle. Not good at receiving. James didn't interrupt. He let her speak, the way people do when they've learned not to hurt others by speaking too soon. But lately, I've realized when I keep my hands in my pockets out of fear of the cold, I'm also refusing the hands that could warm them. She turned to him, meeting his eyes without hesitation. And if you're still willing, maybe, I'll try keeping my hands free this time. James said nothing. He just stepped closer and gently took her hand, the one that had worn through gloves carrying aid boxes during the pandemic, the one that had trembled outside her father's hospital door, the one that had shaken harder when a hug was rejected. Now, that hand was held firmly, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of presence, steady, quiet, real. Outside, the snow still fell. But Charlotte knew, this winter, neither of them had to go through it alone. The next morning, winter sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, painting the wooden floor with a warm, pale gold. In the kitchen, the scent of toast and melting butter mixed with freshly brewed coffee. Charlotte stood at the sink, dish towel in hand, glancing now and then toward the table, where James was carefully writing something on a small piece of paper. He didn't say much, but every gesture, wiping the table clean after dinner, asking, "Are you still cold?" in the middle of the night, was proof of something Charlotte had once believed was impossible. James was trying, not with grand declarations, but with quiet consistency. No noise, no pressure. By noon they arrived at the center, now humming with the spirit of Christmas. On the intake table were gift boxes neatly wrapped, most from anonymous donors, like the one who sent the scarves the night before. People who had once been helped were now returning, in their own way. "This is something I never thought I'd see," Charlotte said quietly, as they hung red ornaments on the tree in the corner. "That giving doesn't stop with just one person." James followed her gaze. At the far end of the room, little Caleb, the son of a single mother who once came to the center after losing their home, was happily teaching an old man how to wrap presents. Life didn't always make sense, but here, within these four walls, people were learning how to be better, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. At the end of the day, after most of the volunteers had gone home, Charlotte sat quietly on a chair near the window. In her hand was the letter James had left that morning, folded neatly in thirds, placed right under her coffee cup. "You once said you didn't need someone to stay if all they brought were promises." "I won't promise anything, Charlotte. The first only ask to be here, every day, whether it's bringing lunch to the center or clearing snow off the porch. If one day you no longer need me, just say so. But if there's still a place left open, I'll be there. No questions, no expectations. Just there." Charlotte folded the letter again, heart tangled, not because of the words, but because for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to carry everything alone. Not all cracks need to be filled. Some just need someone to gently place a hand over them, sit beside them for a long time and say, "I see it, and I'm not afraid of it." That evening, Charlotte passed by James as he was sorting through leftover supply boxes in the storage room. She stopped, said nothing, just quietly took his hand. "Tomorrow, are you busy?" she asked. James looked up, his eyes softer than any promise. "No. Why?" Charlotte smiled, still holding his hand. "I need someone to help buy wrapping paper. And, if you're free, maybe have dinner with me and Miss Dolores." The next morning, The bitter cold of late December crept through every corner of the old neighborhood. A thin layer of snow dusted the community center steps, making every footprint clear, as if the stories of those who passed through still lingered, unwilling to leave. James arrived earlier than usual. In his hands was a small box of butter waffles, still fragrant, and a few rolls of wrapping paper Charlotte had mentioned the day before. He wasn't great at picking decorations, but he tried, each roll in colors she liked: forest green, deep red, a touch of silver shimmer, not flashy, but quietly thoughtful. "You always wake up this early?" Charlotte called from behind, catching him struggling with the back door. James turned, slightly surprised, but didn't speak right away. There was a flicker of relief in his eyes, like something he had hoped for all night had just been confirmed. "No," he said, smiling. "Only when I know someone's waiting." That morning, they wrapped gifts for the upcoming Christmas party. In the small room, the sound of scissors cutting paper, tape snapping, and soft Christmas music from the old speaker created a strange sense of home. Charlotte stayed mostly quiet, but her eyes no longer avoided him. At times, she glanced over and saw James cross-legged on the floor, wrestling with a round-shaped gift. She let out a quiet laugh, not loud but real. James heard it, and to him, that was the clearest sign of a new beginning, one he didn't dare demand, only hope to earn. By noon, Mrs. Dolores arrived. Though her health had declined, she insisted on bringing a large pot of soup, Charlotte's favorite: chicken, brown rice, and vegetables. She'd never been one to trust men, especially not the handsome, quiet, suddenly appearing types like James. But today, she gave him a quick look, then nodded. "You know how to peel carrots?" she asked. James nodded, not quickly, but steadily. Charlotte couldn't help but chuckle, this time, a genuine laugh, without hesitation or doubt. That afternoon, after everything was done, Charlotte sat on the back steps, holding a cup of hot cocoa James had made. She gazed out at the back lot, where children ran through the snow, cheeks flushed, their laughter echoing through the air. James came out, silently sitting beside her. She turned to him and spoke slowly. "Do you know why I stopped trusting people?" James stayed quiet. Not because he didn't want to answer, but because he understood, sometimes, silence is the greatest form of listening. Charlotte continued, her voice low. "Because they come, then leave. They promise, then disappear. They say they care, but choose the easier path." James nodded, then he spoke, carefully, like each word had been chosen and tested. "I don't have promises, but I have time. I'll be there when you need me. And if you let me, I want to stay, not to make up for anything, but because I feel peace here, with you." Charlotte didn't respond. She simply reached out her hand, not to hold, but to place it gently over his, like a breeze, but long enough to say she was beginning to believe. That night, as Christmas lights glowed across the modest East Brooklyn neighborhood, the community center buzzed with a different kind of energy. Children ran around the big tree they had set up the week before. Adults hustled to decorate, cook, and prep for the annual charity dinner. Charlotte stood in the small kitchen, cinnamon batter in hand, a smudge of flour on her collar. Her face was flushed from the heat of the oven, and from the emotion still stirring in her chest. James's midday words echoed in her mind. "I don't have promises, but I have time." They weren't grand, they weren't persuasive in the traditional sense, but they held a strange gravity, like someone had unlocked a long-shut door, not with a key, but with patience. Meanwhile, James was with the kids in the reading corner. He wasn't great at storytelling, but was clumsily acting out the Polar Express, making the children burst into laughter. From a distance, Charlotte watched, shook her head slightly, and smiled. Her heart tugged. "You're looking at him differently now, aren't you?" Mrs. Dolores said, arranging cookies onto a tray. Charlotte startled. I don't know." "You do," she replied firmly. "The way you've stood there watching for 5 whole minutes, you're not fooling anyone but yourself." Charlotte bit her lip, cheeks flushing red. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Scared that if I trust again, I'll lose again." Mrs. Dolores paused, then looked her in the eyes. "Sweetheart, love is always a risk, but if you're risking it for someone who's patient, who stays, who listens, then even if you lose, you won't regret trying. Only men like that are worth the leap." That night, after guests had left and snow began to fall silently in the yard, James returned from escorting a few kids to their bus. He found Charlotte cleaning up the tiny kitchen. "You tired?" he asked softly. She nodded. Yeah, but it's the good kind of tired. James smiled. He hesitated, then pulled a small box from his coat pocket. I'm not great at gifts, but try opening this. Charlotte opened the lid. Inside was a wooden keychain hand-carved into the shape of the old community center building, with a tiny inscription, "Where peace begins." You carved this? She asked, barely above a whisper. James scratched his head. Took me 4 hours and a few finger cuts. Her lips pressed together, eyes bright with emotion. Not because of the gift itself, but because of what it said. He saw the value in the things others overlooked. In that moment, Charlotte took a step closer. James, she said quietly, if you still have time, I might need you just a little longer. James's face lit up like the Christmas lights behind them. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not when you've started to believe. On the morning of December 24th, as Manhattan lay under a light sugar-like coating of snow, Charlotte stepped for the first time into her new office, part of the renovated community space, funded by James after the old center's restoration. The room was small, but bright, painted a gentle cream, lined with framed photos from past volunteer events. In the center stood a solid oak desk. On it, a steaming mug of tea, a small bouquet, and a handwritten note. Charlotte paused before the note. It was James's handwriting, slightly slanted, a little uneven, but firm and clear. Happy first morning in your space. You once said you didn't need someone to rescue you, just someone to walk beside you. I hope I'm patient enough, real enough, to be that person. Jay. A soft smile broke across Charlotte's face, tender as winter sun. She touched the edge of the note as if touching something rare and unspoken. A few hours later, at Mrs. Dolores's house, James showed up with a box of warm pecan pastries. You made these? She asked, skeptical but amused. James nodded, a little shy. Charlotte taught me. I just helped with mixing, and got yelled at for adding too much salt. Mrs. Dolores laughed, her sharp eyes twinkling. You're learning. First time I've seen her let anyone into her kitchen without kicking them out. James didn't answer, just smiled, eyes drifting toward the living room, where Charlotte was chatting with a few volunteers. You scared? Mrs. Dolores asked suddenly, her voice soft but firm. Yeah, James exhaled. Scared I'll mess up. Scared I'll disappoint her. Scared I'm not ordinary enough to make this work long term. She nodded. That means you're serious. The ones who aren't scared? Those are the dangerous ones. That evening, during the small Christmas gathering in the center's backyard, James brought a gift. Not something expensive. Not opera tickets or a weekend in Vermont. A glass jar. Inside, folded notes, each one holding a small message. On the label, 1 year 52 things I love about you. Charlotte took the jar, fingers tightening slightly around it, lips pressed, trying to contain a rising emotion. You don't have to open them now, James said. 1 note a week, until next Christmas. And what if we don't make it to next Christmas? Charlotte asked. Eyes steady. James answered, voice low but sure. Then at least for every week of that year, you'll know someone loved you, piece by piece, honestly. Under twinkling lights and soft bell chimes echoing from the yard, Charlotte reached for his hand and held it, for the first time, without hesitation. Because sometimes, the miracle of Christmas doesn't come from snow or lavish gifts, but from someone who stays quietly, gently, long enough to make you believe again. On the morning of December 26th, as the city still dozed in the afterglow of holiday reunions, Charlotte woke earlier than usual. She brewed coffee by hand, no machine, just to feel every small motion that might bring her peace. After the emotional night with James, she hadn't slept well. Not from worry, but from something rare and unfamiliar, warmth she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Last night he made no grand promises. He simply stayed, real, quiet, and long enough. At the same time, in the top floor office of James's building, his assistant Martin stepped in with a stack of new sponsorship proposals. The morning meetings are wrapped, Martin said. And, about Charlotte, you still want to keep the community center renovation under wraps? James looked up from his laptop, hesitation flickering briefly in his eyes. Not yet, he said. I want her to believe she's capable of building everything with her own hands. Before she finds out I've been clearing the path quietly behind her. Martin gave a slight nod. You're learning to love her in her own language. It's not easy, James smiled faintly, but it's worth it. That afternoon, in a small market on the city's east side, at the bakery stall, Charlotte frequented every weekend. Something unexpected happened. Mr. Felix, the elderly shop owner, collapsed behind the counter. Charlotte was the first to run over. In her desperate cry for someone to call an ambulance, there was panic and something deeper, the echo of grief. She had once watched her mother die from a stroke, a quiet, ever-haunting memory. When the ambulance arrived, she held Mr. Felix's hand tightly, refusing to let go even as it turned cold. When the medics asked her to step back, her eyes were red, her hands trembling, clutching a handkerchief damp with sweat and the scent of stale bread. That evening, when James dropped by her apartment with a homemade cauliflower bake, Charlotte didn't answer the door right away. When she finally did, her eyes were still red, her hair unbrushed. He didn't ask questions, he simply handed her the food. "Do you have time?" she asked softly. "As long as you need." In the small apartment, steeped in the scent of cinnamon tea, Charlotte told him about the harrowing afternoon. She didn't cry. She just spoke, clutching her tea as if to let go would mean falling apart. "I couldn't save my mother," she whispered. "And every time someone collapses in front of me, I'm right back in that moment." James didn't speak. He simply held out his hand, steady, open, unwavering. Charlotte looked at it, then, slowly but decisively, placed hers into his. No words, no comforting lines, just the knowledge that someone was willing to sit beside her in a space she thought was untouchable. That day's lesson didn't come from million-dollar deals or luxury trips. It came from something simpler, that sometimes love isn't about changing someone's world, it's about stepping into it gently, with a listening heart and patience that asks for nothing in return. On the last Sunday morning of the year, light rain fell. December rain in this city wasn't heavy, but it was cold enough to make you want to hold on to something familiar. Charlotte didn't go to the community center like usual. She spent the entire morning curled up on her sofa, wrapped in an old wool blanket, notebook in hand, the one she used to plan free art classes for children in the South End. The latest page was half written. Her thoughts floated somewhere between now and emotions she hadn't named yet. Since the night she fell apart in James's arms, everything felt strangely close. And maybe that was what scared her most. Scared that if she stepped one more inch forward, she wouldn't be able to turn back. That afternoon, James arrived as he always did, with a box of pastries and 2 tickets to a showing of It's a Wonderful Life at the old downtown cinema. Charlotte smiled, half joking. "You think I'm in the mood for a movie?" "I don't think," James replied, calm and steady. "I just hope I can pull you out of that loop in your head for at least 2 hours. After a pause, Charlotte grabbed her cardigan and followed him. No agreement, no resistance. Sometimes what people need is simply the right presence, and somehow James had become part of that need. The theater was tiny, just 3 rows of seats, faint popcorn aroma lingering in the air. They sat in the back row. As the lights dimmed and the film began, Charlotte felt her chest unclench, bit by bit. Halfway through, as the main character wrestled with his own despair, Charlotte leaned over and whispered, "Do you ever feel like everything you're trying to do is just small and meaningless?" James looked at her, very slowly. "I have. But then I met someone who taught me that sometimes it's the small things that truly change someone's life." Their eyes met in the flickering light of the screen. Nothing more needed to be said. After the film, they walked home along cobblestone streets, still lined with Christmas lights. The rain had stopped, but the road was slick, reflecting color like a mirror. At Charlotte's door, she stopped, hands in her coat pockets, eyes downcast. "I know I'm not easy to get close to," she said quietly. "I have walls. I've had them up so long I don't know how to live without them. But lately, I'm scared that if I let them down, I'll lose control." James answered gently, "Then keep the walls. If they make you feel safe, I'm not here to tear them down. I'm just here to sit outside them until you're ready to open the door." That simple sentence, plain, unforced, wrapped around Charlotte's heart like a warm scarf in the middle of a storm. She would write down the lesson of that day later, that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes, it's simply someone who doesn't walk away, someone who shows up, over and over. And sometimes, just one person willing to sit outside your walls is enough to make you want to open them. A few days later, in the quiet chill of January, Charlotte stepped into her favorite cafe on the corner. Wooden tables, worn brick walls. Almost by reflex, she chose the table by the window looking out onto the small garden, where she used to sketch, and where, years ago, she first saw James reading alone. He wasn't there today. But there was a small envelope on the table, marked Charlotte in the familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. She opened it, a mix of nerves and hope rising. This Saturday, if you're free, come to the garden behind the community house, where you once taught the kids to paint their first mural. No pressure. Just an afternoon with hot tea, apple pie, and someone still sitting outside your wall. Bring nothing. Just come as you are. Charlotte folded the letter, her heartbeat quickening. Saturday came with a gray sky, but no rain. She wore an old forest green sweater, warm and soft, carrying a thermos of ginger tea, a small excuse to feel less nervous. As she passed through the creaky wooden gate behind the community house, a simple, heartwarming scene appeared. A picnic table covered with a red and white checkered cloth, a box of warm apple pie, 2 teacups, and a small basket of dried lavender. James sat there in a dark brown coat, gently tuning his wooden guitar. When he saw her, he smiled and stood, pulling out a chair for her. Neither rushed to speak, only the sound of wind brushing the winter garden and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. "I thought you'd be busy all weekend," Charlotte said softly, trying to keep her tone light. James shrugged. "Some things should be done during the week. Weekends are for what matters." She looked at him. His eyes didn't avoid hers. No urgency, just calm, like the pale sunlight filtering through the clouds. In that quiet pause, James pulled out a small framed sketch, the one Charlotte had once drawn of the backyard, filled with laughing children and a vibrant mural. "I don't remember giving you that." "You didn't. I asked to keep it when you left it behind during the move," James replied. "I thought maybe one day you'd need a reminder of why you started." Charlotte hesitated. Her fingers brushed the frame's edge, like touching a memory. Then, softly, James said, "Charlotte, if one day you're ready, I'd love to walk beside you, not just in the pictures you draw, but in the life you're building, day by day." She didn't answer immediately. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her eyes stayed gentle. A part of her still hesitated, but another part had already begun to open, like a window slowly unlatched, letting in the first light of winter sun. "That day's lesson," she whispered silently, "that the most precious thing isn't always a grand vow, but the quiet, steady presence of someone who believes in you even when you're still struggling to believe in yourself." On Sunday morning, winter light trickled through the curtains of Charlotte's small apartment. On the windowsill table, her watercolor set remained open. An unfinished sketch sat askew, like her current mood, halfway between clarity and confusion. She hadn't slept much. The meeting in the old garden with James played over and over. His eyes, his unpressured invitation, and that breath-like sentence, "I'd love to walk beside you." At 9:00 a.m., she received a message from her mother. "You haven't replied to the family's New Year's invitation. Everyone is hoping to see you, especially your father." Charlotte sighed. The family gathering was always a mix of longing and anxiety. The expectations, the familiar questions. When will you settle down? Still painting? Words meant with care, yet somehow cutting deeper than intended. Around noon, she wandered into the old bookstore, the one where she and James had once both reached for the same copy of Tuesdays with Maury. She walked in, hoping to see him flipping through pages in the corner. But no. Only the cold wind slipping through the door and the musty scent of old paper. On the shelf, the same book. She opened it. A small slip of paper fell out. "When you learn to forgive yourself for the times you've fallen, you'll realize the greatest freedom doesn't come from running away, but from standing still and choosing the path you truly want." She knew the handwriting. It was his. That night, Charlotte tidied her apartment. She opened a tin box, one filled with old letters, early sketches, and a photo of her mother hugging a 10-year-old Charlotte after her first school art show. In the soft yellow light, she asked herself for the first time, what am I really afraid of? Being rejected? Or being loved the right way? James never asked her to be perfect. He just stood there, quietly, holding open a door so that light could slip in if she ever chose to step out. That night, Charlotte sat at her computer. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. The blinking cursor waited, like a quiet question, waiting for her decision. Then she started to type, "Dear Mom, I'll be coming home for New Year's Eve. I know you and Dad always worry about me. But today, I want to say that I've finally found a reason to stop running, being myself. I won't promise to live the way you want me to, but I will live true to my heart. And if you can, I hope you'll try to look at me, not with worry, but with trust. Love, Charlotte. Then she picked up her phone. Her heart was pounding, but her eyes were calm, like a lake after rain. Message sent. James, if your invitation from yesterday is still open, I'm ready to walk a little ways with you, starting now. On the afternoon of December 30, the taxi stopped in front of the old two-story house where Charlotte had grown up. The winter sunset cast a soft glow across the worn brick steps and the bare trees, like a memory not yet complete. She stepped out, pulling a small suitcase behind her. The smell of old wood and faint cinnamon from inside hit her, and something in her chest tightened. Year after year, this time of year had always been a checkpoint, a gathering, a quiet reckoning between generations. The door opened. Her mother, Lorraine, pulled her into a tight hug, tight enough that Charlotte could hear her mother's heartbeat, pounding, perhaps from joy, perhaps from fear. You've lost weight, her mother whispered, still not letting go. Charlotte smiled, but her eyes searched quietly for a figure she wasn't sure she wanted to see or avoid. Then, from the living room, he stepped out. Her father, Edward, looked the same, tall, formal, his expression ever reserved, like all emotions needed to pass through 3 layers of approval before being shown. A glass of wine in hand, his gaze neither soft nor harsh, just guarded. "You're home," he said. A statement, not a greeting. Charlotte nodded. "Yes. Happy New Year, Dad." Silence settled briefly between them. That night, the dinner began with relatives, clinking glasses, and the usual questions. "So what are you up to these days? Anyone special yet? When are you going to settle down?" Charlotte smiled lightly, answered politely, but kept the truth she cherished tucked away, not because she was hiding, but because truth needs the right room to breathe. As the evening wore on, fireworks lit up the sky outside. Charlotte stood alone under the porch, a glass of untouched red grape juice in her hand. Suddenly, her father appeared beside her. He didn't say anything at first. Then, after a pause, "I know, I'm not easy to be around, but that doesn't mean I don't care." Charlotte stayed silent, eyes fixed on the sky bursting in color. "I've never really asked what you want," he continued slowly, "because I thought I already knew what was best. But I realize now, I might have been wrong." She turned to look at him. For the first time in years, her gaze held no armor, only a soft kind of understanding. "I don't blame you, Dad," she said. "I just want you to trust me. And if I fall, let me get back up on my own. Not because you're absent, but because you believe I can." The wind cut through her coat collar, but it didn't make her shiver. Because in that moment, they found each other again, not just as father and daughter, but as 2 people learning to accept the space between them. Her father nodded, slow, quiet, the kind of nod that says, "I'm ready to let go of being right to hold on to what matters." Before bed, Charlotte opened her phone and found a message from James. "Are you okay? If you need someone to listen, I'm always here. Happy New Year, Charlotte." She smiled softly, placed her hand over the screen, and typed, "I just had a moment I never thought I'd get. Thank you for waiting. I'll tell you about it tomorrow, if the coffee invite still stands." New Year's Day morning, the sky over Chicago was cold but unusually bright. The snow had melted overnight, leaving damp streaks on the sidewalk, as if the whole city, too, was starting over. At a small cafe tucked between brick buildings in the West Loop, Charlotte pushed open the door. The bell above jingled gently, releasing the warm scent of fresh coffee and toasted waffles. The smell wrapped around her like a hug, welcoming anyone who was searching for something between all of life's uncertain intersections. James was already there, seated by the window, in a charcoal gray turtleneck, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, quietly watching the world go by. When he saw her, he stood, not rushing, not speaking right away. Just his gaze, steady, open, was enough to settle something turbulent inside her. "I ordered you a latte," he said. "Still your favorite, right?" "Still is," Charlotte smiled, soft, like an exhale she'd been holding in for months. They sat. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of spoons clinking, the heater ticking, and the heartbeats of 2 people, not quite ready to touch, but no longer afraid to be near. Then Charlotte spoke, her voice low, honest. "Yesterday, my father apologized. For the first time in my life." James nodded, saying nothing. He didn't ask for more. He knew, sometimes, just holding the space for someone is enough. He admitted he'd been wrong, that he thought he knew what was best for me, but never really knew what I wanted. "And you?" he asked. I told him I didn't need him to carry my life. I just needed him to believe I could stand on my own. James looked at her, pride and quiet tenderness flickering in his eyes. Then you've stepped past something you once feared most. Not completely, she said, but at least. I'm not backing away anymore. They sat in silence a little longer. This silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that comes when two people are finally facing the same direction, even if the road ahead remains uncertain. Then James said, his words soft but deliberate, like something he'd rehearsed many times. I've never been sure about many things in life, Charlotte. But today, when you walked through that door, I knew I wanted you to stay. She looked at him. In her eyes was the fragility of someone who had been broken, but also the brightness of someone slowly stitching herself back together. If I stay, she asked gently, will you promise not to try to fix me? James smiled. I don't want to fix you, Charlotte. I just want to understand you. That sentence, simple, sincere, made her heart clench, like a child, finally finding a place she could belong. 2 weeks later, Charlotte received an email that made her freeze before her screen. Subject, offer of employment, Berlin Program Director. It was the role she'd dreamed of back in her senior year at Boston University, an international education program headquartered in Berlin. They were offering her the director position, a 2-year contract, generous salary, full relocation support. Charlotte closed the screen, leaned back in her chair, stared into nothing. Her heart beat steadily, not with joy, but with quiet conflict. A few years ago, she would have accepted in a heartbeat, but now there was James. There was her father, learning to love her. There was a life she had just begun to rebuild from brokenness. That evening, in her small, warmly lit apartment, she placed 2 cups of tea in front of James and told him everything, every detail, every emotion. He listened without interrupting, just watched her, taking in the shifts in her face, the weight of her uncertainty. If it were the old me, she said, I would have said yes immediately. And now? I don't know, she admitted. I'm afraid I'll run, because I'm used to not staying. But I'm also afraid that if I stay, I'll lose this once-in-a-lifetime chance. And if I leave, I might lose you, lose my dad. James placed his hand over hers, light but steady. Charlotte, if what you're weighing is a whole new life, then that life should be big enough to hold everything you love, not force you to leave it behind. She looked at him, eyes beginning to mist. You're not going to try to stop me? Stopping someone is easy, but loving someone enough to let them choose freely, that's the hard part. For the first time, Charlotte realized she didn't have to carry every decision alone anymore. She could move forward, knowing that behind her was a presence that would never push, but would always be there if she turned around. A week later, she sent a reply to the organization in Berlin. Not a rejection, but a proposal. I'm very interested in the position you've offered. However, I'd like to request a delayed start by 3 months. I'm currently working on a small-scale community project locally, and I'd like to complete it before relocating. If this adjustment is acceptable, I would be honored to join your team at the beginning of summer. When she received the confirmation from Berlin, Charlotte smiled, not because she had won anything grand, but because she was learning not to trade one precious thing just to gain another. One late afternoon in April, with spring breezes beginning to stir the trees in Grant Park, Charlotte stood beside a silver-gray suitcase, eyes on the platform. The train to Berlin would depart at 6:40 p.m. James walked beside her in silence, his hands buried in his coat pockets, palms sweating despite the cool weather. All week, they had only talked about normal things: who would water the plants in the apartment, whether her father would keep up chess with the neighbors, if James planned to visit the dog shelter that weekend. They hadn't spoken much about the goodbye, but that didn't mean their hearts weren't heavy. Charlotte lightly pulled the suitcase handle and turned to him. I still don't really know what's waiting on the other side of the ocean. That's exactly why you should go, James replied with a quiet smile, his eyes deeper than any farewell. And you? I'm staying. Your dad's here. The kids at the skills center are here. And all the things you once said you missed, because you kept running, they're here too. They fell quiet. Then Charlotte whispered, and if I don't come back? James stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her cheek. His fingers were cold, but his gaze was warmer than anything she'd known. If you don't come back, at least you'll know you didn't live a life of what-ifs. And if I do, then I'll still be here. As the train prepared to leave the platform, James didn't say, I love you. He didn't say, come back soon. He just held her hand tight and said, simply, "Go, Charlotte. Go, so you know you can come back." Charlotte stepped onto the train. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because some people, no matter how far, are always the place you can return to. 2 months later, in late summer Berlin, Charlotte sat by the window of her third-floor apartment, overlooking a quiet street bathed in golden light. She had just completed her practicum at the Design Institute, where everything moved fast, and dreams were drawn with technical plans rather than warm kitchen conversations like back home. She had learned to live by new routines, in a new language, with long nights filled only with the sound of her own breathing between 4 unfamiliar walls. But what she hadn't learned was how to stop missing. Missing James's old brown bicycle, the sandwich shop where he always added extra cheese, even though she said she didn't like it. His hands, always quiet, always steady, like roots in the ground. That Friday afternoon, she opened her mailbox and found a postcard. No words. Just a photo of a quiet corner in Grant Park, the bench where they said goodbye. On the back, only 4 words. Still here, J. Charlotte stood still. She didn't cry, but there was a small crack in her heart, like the fine line on a ceramic mug after boiling water. That night, she wrote back. Not much. Just this, don't know when, but I still remember the way back. Meanwhile, in Chicago, James had left his architecture firm. He now taught part-time at the vocational center and spent afternoons mentoring teenagers who'd taken a few wrong turns. He still lived in the same apartment, but now the windowsill had small flower pots, the kind Charlotte once said she wanted to plant, but never got around to. When someone asked, "Are you waiting for her to come back?" James would just smile, sip his black tea, and answer, "Not really waiting. I'm just keeping things as they are, in case she ever wants to come back." A year later, in Chicago's autumn, yellow leaves scattered across cobbled sidewalks. Grant Park was as quiet as ever, except now, the old bench had been freshly painted and a small plaque added, dedicated to moments that mattered, 10.14. That was the day Charlotte came back. No announcement, no plan. She stepped off an early flight, wheeled her suitcase through Union Station, and walked slowly through the streets that still held echoes of laughter. At a small bakery by the corner, she ordered the exact pastry James used to buy, peanut butter and banana. She'd never liked it, but today it tasted oddly warm and sweet. By late afternoon, she stepped into the park, heart fluttering, yet calm, as if things might return to normal, or not. And then he was there, on the old bench, holding a copy of The Architecture of Belonging. He looked up at the sound of suitcase wheels on gravel. His eyes paused for a second. She stopped walking. That moment needed no words. James stood. They didn't run to each other like in the movies. They just stood there, breathing. "I thought you didn't sit here anymore," Charlotte said quietly. "I thought you wouldn't come back. But I'm here, and I still am." At their old cafe by the lake, they sat across from each other. No red wine this time. Just 2 cups of hot tea, like old friends learning how to begin again. Charlotte spoke of Berlin's cold nights, of design drafts no one praised, but she still sent off. James talked about 17-year-olds who didn't believe in tomorrow, and how he'd learned patience just by waiting for them to show up. No one mentioned mistakes, or what was lost. They were no longer the ones who left or the ones who stayed. They were 2 people, changed, quietly braver, grown. That evening, Charlotte visited the old apartment. James had kept everything the same. The only photo they had together still sat in its little wooden frame on his desk. "You never took it down?" she asked. "No. I figured if one day you came back, you'd see you still had a place here." Charlotte smiled. She walked to the window and looked out. "And if I hadn't come back, the photo would still be there." Some things aren't meant to be replaced. 1 week later, there were no big promises, no talk of the next 10 years, just a small agreement to start again on a Tuesday night, cooking together, trying that pasta dish Charlotte once burned. James made tea. Charlotte laughed, embarrassed, when a slice of apple slipped from her hand. Simple, imperfect, but this time they let it be. The story of Charlotte and James isn't a story about success. There is no castle, no fairy tale wedding, but there is something better, someone who knew how to wait, someone who chose to come back, and 2 people who loved, not out of need, but out of want, after learning how to live without each other. In a world full of movement and options, sometimes what makes love last isn't the forever promise. but the patience to stay, the courage to return, and the kindness to keep your heart intact even after someone has walked away.